we still continue with little remarks and reflections. At this time, the Reverend Dr. Calvin Johnson is going to come. He's the pastor of Dare to Imagine Church in Philadelphia, and one of the sons. Hold on, y'all. I said Calvin, but I know what I'm doing. Because I tease him, because he certainly acts like Calvin Butts. But Kevin Johnson is the pastor of Dare to Imagine Church and one of our sons. And also, following Pastor Johnson is going to be Dr. Sandy Johnson, who's a founding principal of Thurgood Marshall Academy for Learning and Social Change, and executive director of the Harlem Renaissance Education Pipeline. Following Dr. Johnson will be Dr. Sean Davenport, who is the New York City School Superintendent for District 5. Following Dr. Davenport will be Dr. Deborah Frazier House, who is the founder of Choose Healthy Life and National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS. Following Dr. Howes will be Karen Phillips, who's the executive director, first executive director of the Abyssinian Development Corporation, and whom I shared a desk with when I first came to Abyssinian. And they're going to come in this order, and they're going to be brief.
To Mrs. Butts, the Butts family, I come here today because the family has asked me to speak on behalf of Reverend Butts' beloved Morehouse community. Amen. And I am going to ask at this time if the chair of the Board of Trustees, Willie Woods, if you will please stand, Vice President of External Affairs, Henry Goodgame, if you will please stand, Dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel, Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr., if you will please stand. And with the Morehouse community, brothers, will you please stand? It has often been said Dr. Butts is a Morehouse man. Amen. But I would want to correct that. He was not a Morehouse man. He was the Morehouse man. Whether it was the twinkle in his eye, his $1 million smile, his tailor-made suits, his intellectual prowess, his multi-dimensional business acumen, his confident demeanor, you knew that Dr. Calvin Otis Butts III was a Morehouse man. I remember meeting Dr. Butts for the very first time when I was a student at Morehouse College, and he delivered a speech that is forever with me, the prosecution of the black man. I knew that I had to apply to Union Theological Seminary after hearing him speak and come here to work under him at Abyssinian. It was Palm Sunday that Kimi and I joined the church in 1997. And Dr. Butts said as we came down the aisle, "This is Kevin Johnson. He's a Morehouse man. I got to find something for him to do." I said, "Pastor, what is my job going to be?" He said, "You're going to be my gopher, because that's where everybody starts." And he not only poured into me, but he poured into a legion of Morehouse men, like Senator Raphael Warnock, like D. Dowell Griffin, like Rashad Moore, like Nicholas Richards, and so many more. In fact, there were so many Morehouse men coming through Abyssinian until you would have thought that the Abyssinian Baptist Church was the Underground Railroad and Dean Carter was the conductor. Dr. Butts represented what Dr. Hugh M. Gloucester would call the college's rare souls, not just because of his prophetic witness, but because of his prophetic courage, not just because of his moral conscience, but because of his moral conviction, and not just because of his rousing vernacular, but because of his ability to inspire, motivate, and speak truth to power. In 1998, I had the privilege firsthand to witness his moral conviction. It was at that time that he was being interviewed at New York 1, and the reporter, matter of fact, the anchor, asked him a question about, at that time, Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And he said, is he a racist? And as only Reverend Butts could do, there was a pause. And then he said, yes. And it seemed like all hell broke loose. As he and I were on our way back up here to Harlem, I mustered up the courage to ask him, what are you going to do? Because a call came in and there was the sound of this noise. And the person on the other line said, do you hear that? And he said, yes. He said, what is that? He said, that's a shredder that is shredding your contract for Thurgood Marshall Academy. Now when you go by 135th Street and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard, you may be asking the question, how did it get built? Reverend Butts said to me, and I will never forget it, he said, Kevin, under no circumstances do you ever give up your prophetic voice. There will always be another mayor. Yes, Dr. Butts embodied Dr. Mays when he said, you must believe that when you tell the truth, the sun, the moon, and the stars are on your side. You must believe that when you stand up for what is right, all the hosts of heaven, the universe, and the eternal God stand with you. Yes, Dr. Butts was the quintessential Morehouse man. Dean Carter, he was walking integrity because, like Dr. Mays, he was born to rebel.
Good afternoon. Education and faith are the Tigris and the Euphrates of our liberation, twin rivers of the source of our redemption. You know, it's a tradition in the Abyssinian Baptist Church that when a family member transitions, that flowers are put on the pulpit the following Sunday in their memory. I remember coming to church the Sunday after my mother's funeral in May of 1980 to do just that. It was my intention to honor my mother's memory, but not my intention to ever return. I have been away from the church for a while and had only started to come recently to assist my mother in attending church. After the church service, I stopped to make a phone call outside the pastor's office. Before then, there was no cell phone, so I had to wait for the payphone in the stairwell. And while waiting, I heard someone say my name. I didn't pay any attention, because it had been some time since I was in church. However, the person kept calling my name. So I turned slowly, and it was Reverend Butts trying to get my attention. He had eulogized my mother and wanted to see how I was doing. He asked me what I did, and I told him I was an educator, and he asked me would I volunteer for the church's after-school program. The only thing I could say to myself was, oh, I almost made it out. How can I say no to the pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church? So I said to myself, I know what I'll do. I'll just attend a few meetings and I'll just slowly disappear. Well, as you can see, I never left. That Sunday in May of 1980 started my 43-year journey with Reverend Butts on his education campaign to ensure equitable educational opportunities for Black and brown students with a focus on the public schools in District 5. He was unrelenting, uncompromising, and persistent in his quest. Starting in 1980 with the church's after-school program servicing 30 students, then moving on to canvassing the schools in District 5 to assess the quality and needs of the schools, which led to his vision of creating the Thurgood Marshall Upper and Lower Academies, which impacted thousands of students and families since 1993. I feel so blessed. I truly feel so blessed to be involved with Reverend Butts' education legacy. So glad that I did not walk out of the church in 1980 with the intention of not returning. Reverend Butts saw something in me that I did not see in myself. I am committed in continuing his education legacy to ensure that Black and brown students have equitable educational opportunities so that they can become thriving adults. Like Reverend Butts taught me, I too will be unrelenting, uncompromising, and persistent in this quest. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I guess everybody, good afternoon. I'm standing down here because Reverend Butts don't like a lot of people going up and out his pulpit. And, I remember that. So in 2004, he came to me and said, Sean, we want to open a lower school so we can have a feeder school to Thurgood Marshall Academy. And I want you to be the principal. I'm like, I don't want to be the principal because I said elementary school. I don't want to do that. And he said, don't be scared. I believe you can do it. And what you don't know is that there were 3 principals before Dr. Johnson at the high school. And so when he asked me to do the lower school, I just didn't like the odds. But we did the lower school, and his vision was to have an educational pipeline in Harlem. That was the vision, but it takes a visionary to make it happen. 13 years later in 2018, we graduated our first pipeline from kindergarten through 12th grade, all the way through. It was that vision, that confidence that he had in me, that led me to see beyond my possibilities. And before I take my seat, we have the chancellor here, we have the mayor here, and the one thing he taught me was to always speak truth to power. And the one thing he also taught me was never be scared to say what's on your mind. And I love the Thurgood Marshall Academies. I was a founder of one. But I do believe today there may be a need for a name change.
Hello, church family. Is this on? Hello, church family. I'm Deborah Fraser Howes. My Calvin Butts has been my friend, my mentor, and my pastor for more than 40 years. Reverend Butts buried my mother, my father, and my 25-year-old son. He's worked with my daughter, Sheena, for years. He's part of my family. His family is my family. Patricia, I love you. We all love you. And we want to thank you for sharing him with us for 50 years. You didn't have to do it, and you did it with grace and charm and beauty. Thank you. Naomi, Graham, we also thank you. For 21 years, you were by his side, and you made things happen, the kinds of things that he wanted to happen. Reverend Butts was my partner in health in all the health programs that I created from the 1970s to now. We worked together in the late 70s to create teenage pregnancy prevention programs in black churches all over the city. He became the chairman of the board of the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS, now Health, which I founded in 1987. He developed 17 affiliates across the country, all led by black clergy, where they would have policy meetings and raising money for HIV and AIDS in their local communities. He helped develop the Minority HIV/AIDS Initiative, which since 1998 and under President Clinton has rendered billions of dollars in new funding to black communities all over the country for HIV and AIDS. He was appointed to President Obama's President's Advisory Council on AIDS, and I can guarantee you that Reverend Calvin Butts taught Obama his swagger. I am not just here to tell you these things about what Reverend Butts has done nationally and internationally, going to the UN to develop the policies for the UN on children who are orphaned by AIDS, children left behind, so that no one would be left behind. It is billions of dollars. It is national. It is international. When I hear people call him a Harlem preacher, I try to figure out who they're talking about. This was a man of international importance. Like the likes we have never seen and may not see again after. He had strength, he had style, he had grace, and most of all, he had faith. He could have asked a lot of people to speak to you today, but he asked me. So I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you a story about the real Reverend Calvin Otis Butts III. When I told Reverend Butts that I was going to seminary 2 years ago, he would call me constantly and ask me about my calling and did I really want to do it? Did I understand the burden and what needed to happen? And when I told him I really don't want to bury people, he said, baby, you're in the wrong business. That's going to happen. So he would talk me through those moments that I had of question and craziness. He would actually read my papers and call me back about the typos. He didn't like typos. At one point, and because we worked so closely together when I founded Choose Healthy Life, an organization, and several of the Choose Healthy Life pastors are here today. Would you please stand? The Choose Healthy Life pastors from all over the country. We went from 50 churches in 5 cities to 120 churches in 13 states, and from $5 million to $18 million in 12 months. Reverend Butts did this partnering with Reverend Sharpton. So we had a work relationship and a spiritual relationship, and I remember, and somebody said that Reverend Butts always told the truth, and that is true. And I remember coming back from doing a service with the Choose Healthy Life preachers, and they were so good. They hooped and hollered and got people up off their seats, and I got up to do my sermon, and I bombed. I was horrible. I was so bad, I was ashamed of myself. So when he called me that night to ask me how everything went, I didn't want to tell him, and I just said, Rev, I cannot tell you. I can't hoop and holler, I can't. He said, listen, you don't have to hoop and holler. You know, he wasn't big on the hooping and hollering. He said, you don't have to hoop and holler, but you did read the text. And I said, yes. He said, you have it taped? Yes. I sent it to him. He called me back 15 minutes later. And he said, Deborah, you didn't do so bad. You read the text. You talked about faith and fear. You made it all make sense. You do public speaking. You're going to be just fine. He said, but let me ask you a question. What was that outfit you had on? See, this one is falling off now. He said that purple satin robe that you had on, what was that about with the flapping sleeves? And I said, well, Reverend, I brought that outfit because the purple, I thought it went along with my hair and it would be cute. He said, And then he said his favorite word, beloved. And you knew when he said beloved, something profound was getting ready to happen. He said, beloved, you do realize that purple robes are reserved for the bishops. Thank you.
It's hard to follow that. But I am humbled to be asked to speak today about Abyssinian Development Corporation because Reverend Butts is very close to me. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the beginnings of it. And your presence here and the look of the community that we've come to is all because of this man and his vision, leadership, skills, power, and most of all, for me, trust. I joined this church in 1986, and when we came to the Right Hand of Fellowship, I shook his hand and whispered, I'm from Ocilla, and he went. Ocilla, Georgia is where our families are from on both sides. My mother and my father, his mother and his father. His father's actually from Fitzgerald, but anyway, it's all close down there. So a couple of weeks later, I got past our beloved gatekeeper, Miss Esther McCall, to meet him in the office, and I said, well, I just really want to tell you that I work for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I do real estate development, and I did an internship with the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and I'd like to just help improve the block, which was, and you can't envision it unless you were there, boarded up buildings, graffiti covered, vacant lots, and I'm telling you, I went in some apartments on the block with people living that even from South Georgia, from what I'd seen, with conditions were horrible. And a lot of them were City of New York owned, but anyway. So I said, I would like to do some things and, you know, to help on a committee to do some things. And he just opened up the drawer. Of course, this was an office with several other people in it. It was not a palatial office, but he pulled out this request for qualifications, and he pulled out plans that one of his high school friends, Camlet Wallace, had drawn up for some of the buildings. I was like, oh, well, you're great, and tell me where the committee is, and we'll work on it. He was like, no, you go and take this and see what you can do. I was like, I got a job. in any event, I came back to him and I said, this is great. This proposal is for homeless housing. I think you need a comprehensive plan so that it's not just building housing for the poor, but also reviving the whole community. And I know there's some things, and I have some friends like Kevin Magruder and people who know about community development, and other churches have done faith-based development. And 3 years later, I was still volunteering to pull this together with Dr. Proctor's guidance, and that leadership was to select people from this congregation to help me to figure out the programs and projects that we've done from all walks of life. I see so many of it, and just please, the people who worked with us, who were on the board with us, who politically and in this congregation helped to build this organization that was his vision. Just wave your hand just for a minute. It is so awesome. Thank you, thank you. It was not just me. But when I talk about, first of all, trust, that he would trust somebody who, as a lot of the members reminded me, she just got here. And to use the name of a church that had such a legacy in a development, it was very, very awesome. And to have the people who served with me, and I'm just saying that people were committed to this vision and the leadership that he provided for us to make this community change. That trust, the leadership, his skills. We forget that he did study urban planning, and he used that in his political acumen, sometimes in different ways that we just, almost fell out when we heard him say some things about the leadership. But we survived, and we changed this community forever. And when I talk about what happened, it was to transform a neighborhood that was synonymous with all that was bad, not just in Harlem, in the US, in the city, but all over the world. People would say the Harlems of the world, where people, and now people want to be here. Now, we can go over the numbers of the things, and they want to live here, and I'm still going to be here with his family and with this church and serving the people. And we started with the least of these, with housing for the homeless, not in someone else's backyard, but in the front yard of, as one of the community board people said, you're going to put that in front of the Abyssinian Baptist Church? And yes, and it's still there. I just want to say that his power came from his fierce faith in the power of this pulpit and of God through all things. And that's what survived, and we got it, and we moved forward with it. And as many of the clergy here will know, that in Matthew, and I have to look and see what some of my friends who were more astute at this said, and it's so true, that said, the greatest among you is a servant. And he was a servant to this community, to the nation, and to the world. And I'm just pleased that I was able to walk this path with him. Well, job well done.
Thank you, Sister Karen. I am a recipient of the Abyssinian condo, so I'm grateful for this church. Amen. Before the choir comes, I do want to acknowledge, and he's going to come and do acknowledgments following the spiritual, but Reverend Rashad Hargett has been marvelous in this church. And Evan Hargrave. He has really kept us together, and we want to thank you so much for your leadership during this most difficult time. So I just want to thank you personally, and the people of Abyssinia, and thank you for all that you do. This time the choir is going to come, and then following that we'll have acknowledgments by Dr. Hawker. Beloved, before Dr. Hoggard comes, I want to have come to do some Abyssinian reflections. One of Abyssinian sons, the Reverend Dr. Raphael Gamaliel Warnock, who is the United States Senator from Georgia and the senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and my brother beloved. Pastor Warnock, would you come at this time?
Mrs. Butts, to the Butts family. To the Abyssinian family, sisters and brothers, I've been asked to come and speak on behalf of the sons and daughters of Abyssinian. I'd like all of the clergy in the house to please stand. All the clergy. And now I'd like, among the clergy, will the sons and daughters of Abyssinian stand? The sons and daughters. I had to be here. Amen. Here lies my pastor. My mentor. And no matter whatever else is going on in my life, I got a few things happening down in Georgia. I had to be here. We had to be here. And I am sure that I echo the sentiments of all the daughters and the sons of Abyssinian when I simply say, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Butts. Thank you, Mrs. Butts. Thank you, Abyssinian family, for sharing him, and thank God for the Reverend Dr. Calvin Otis Butts III. Come on, give God praise for Dr. Butts. Come on, give God praise for Dr. Butts. Let Mount Zion rejoice. And let the heavens proclaim. Thank God for a voice crying out in the wilderness. Make straight the way of the Lord, building a highway in the desert for our God. Thank God for Dr. Butts. And when he shall die, take him and cut him out into little stars. He shall make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the Garris sun. I moved to New York after graduating from Morehouse College to attend Union Theological Seminary in the fall of 1991. Born and raised my entire life in Georgia, I was glad to be here in New York. Stevie Wonder said skyscrapers, everything. But New York is expensive. And I needed a job because I went to college and seminary on a full faith scholarship. That's when you don't have enough money for the first semester. And so I called the Abyssinian Baptist Church, and the late and ever earnest Faye Daly answered the phone. And I introduced myself. I said, I'm Raphael Warnock. I just graduated from Morehouse College. I'm a student at Union Theological Seminary, and I'd like an audience with Dr. Calvin Butts. And she said, well, let me see. Let me check his schedule. She got back to me. She said, he can see you, and she gave me a date. It was more than 2 months away. And being the brash Morehouse man I was at age 22, I couldn't imagine that he'd make me wait for 2 months. And I needed a job. It was urgent, so I thought. But as it turns out, Mrs. Butts worked in the Human Resources Department at Union. I introduced myself to her. Because like a smart young Morehouse man, I knew where the power was. And she said, if you need any help, need anything, let me know. I said, I need a job. And I'm trying to get an appointment with your husband. And not long after, a day or so after, she called me on the hall phone. I answered the phone. She said, my husband is in his office right now, and if you can get to Harlem, he'll see you right now. I jumped in a gypsy cab. And I made my way to Harlem. Some took the A train, I took the gypsy cab. We had a great conversation. He invited me to church the following Sunday, and there began a 10-year adventure working alongside him in this church. And Abyssinian has a grand tradition that somebody needs to document in that regard of training young preachers. Dr. Proctor did it for him. I know we all the great Dr. Butts, but when Dr. Proctor came here in 1972, he said, go over to the seminary and find me somebody who don't know anything, and that's why he brought Calvin Butts. I'm telling you what Dr. Butts told me. He was here with Dr. McNichol, and they passed that tradition on. And it's rich and important. There is no Elisha without Elijah. There is no Joshua without Moses. And so I'm forever grateful because he allowed a 22-year-old kid to stand here and practice preaching on y'all. And I'm still practicing. This moving train began 10 years, me moving between Union Seminary and Abyssinian Church, between the ivory towers of the academy and the ebony trenches of ministry in Harlem. Calvin Butts taught me so many things, but in an effort to be fairly brief, and Griffin and I came here together. I won't tell you some of the jokes he would crack. Sometimes we'd be sitting here and they'd be serving communion and we'd be looking all profound and reverential, and Dee would be saying some stuff to me, but I won't share that. Calvin Butts taught me how to take my ministry to the streets, because he understood that the church's work doesn't end at the church door. That's where it starts. He preached here on Sunday, but his actual pulpit was the public square. So whether the issue was affordable housing or the inordinate amount of cigarette and alcohol advertising on billboards in poor black and brown communities, or educational equity, or police brutality, he knew how to raise the issue and put it in a moral and ethical frame. His pulpit was the public square. And what a clear and courageous voice for justice he was. In the words of James Weldon Johnson, he was one of God's trombones. Climbing up on billboards and painting over them, who does that? Challenging racist and misogynistic lyrics in hip-hop. I was here. I gave a speech that day. I was out there in the streets when he got on that steamroller of Mayor Adams. He got on the steamroller. But the young people of Harlem got between him and the steamroller, because they didn't see it his way. And I was 20 years old, and I understood what he was saying, but I was a part of that generation. But it got a conversation going about the politics of respectability, about the commodification of black life, about commercialism and culture, and what is the responsibility of the artist. A conversation that's going on right now. That's part of what a prophet does, stirs us up and gets us thinking and talking and moving. I had the privilege of sitting here with him, watching him getting arrested while getting in good trouble. And when preachers were too scared and too confused, let's face it, too homophobic to say the word HIV/AIDS, Calvin Butts was confronting the issue, organizing clergy and other leaders to start the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS. His pulpit was the public square. So much of who I am and what I've become and what I've managed to do, and as we say in Georgia, what I'm fixing to do again. So much of that. How to handle the media when they're asking silly questions. I learned how to do that serving next to Calvin Butts. He was a prophet with the heart of a priest. Hear me, a prophet with the heart of a priest. Prophets afflict the comfortable. Priests comfort the afflicted. Good pastors know how to do both. He visited the sick, married and counseled couples, comforted the bereaved, rejoiced with those who rejoiced, wept with those who wept, cheered us on. He shepherded his flock, and I am blessed to be among them. Let me tell you about my pastor. Last fall, I was in New York raising money for my campaign, And my pastor pulled himself up from his sick bed and came to Londell's to introduce me at a fundraiser. And about a month ago, September 29th, he sent me his last text message. Lying on his dying bed, he said, "I see that Ian, the storm, is maybe headed to Savannah, your hometown, thinking about you on his dying bed, praying about you always. Just know we love you," in all caps, peace. "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives. So don't be afraid." And so, although I'm just 4 days from a showdown, I had to be here. I took a 7:30 a.m. flight this morning from Atlanta. It was supposed to land at 9:30, hours before the funeral, because I was taking no chances. I would have come last night, but it was impossible. But I took 7:30 flight for a 2 o'clock funeral. Should have landed at 9:30. I was taking no chances. I wanted to make sure I made it to the city. But an hour into the flight, the pilot came over the public address system and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there's a thick fog hanging over New York City. Visibility is very low, and they have halted all traffic going into LaGuardia. And so we are in a holding pattern, and we're going to stay here until they give us further instructions." A few minutes later, he came back on the public address system. He said, "The fog is still hanging over the city. Fuel is getting low. We're going to have to be diverted to Charlotte." Flew us all the way back to Charlotte, North Carolina. Landed the plane, said, "We want everybody to stay on the plane because hopefully we'll be able to take off in just a little while." A few minutes later, they said, "We're going to be here for a while, so everybody get off the plane." We got off the plane. And then about an hour or so later, they told us we could get back on the plane. Got on the plane, they said, "Everybody be seated because we need to be ready when they give us the go-ahead. We want to take off and make our way to New York City." We began to taxi down the runway, thought we were about to take off. They said the fog still won't really cooperate, and so we'll be sitting here for about another 45 minutes. And there we were sitting there on the runway, and I was worried because I wanted to make it to the city. And after a while, they told us, "Listen, sit down so we can be wheels up. We're headed to the city." 4 years. Don't encourage me, but for years, for decades, we watched Calvin Butts move like a man in a hurry. He was always on the move. And for the last several months, we watched him, in the words of Ernest Gaines, teach another lesson before dying. We saw him navigate the thick fog of cancer and the thick fog of sickness and pain and come to terms with his own mortality, and he really wanted to keep moving. But the pilot came over the public address system and said, "Sit down. It's time to be wheels up. You're on your way to the city. There is a land where pleasure reigns. No mournful soul shall roam its plain. And to that land of grace and glory, I hope to go someday. I do not know how long it will be."
Mrs. Butts, the Butts children, grandchildren, to my sisters and brothers all in faith and in struggle, good afternoon. The family has received over 70 resolutions. And of course, sisters and brothers, due to time, I will read one and an excerpt from a few. We have received resolutions from churches, higher education institutions, foundations, and political leaders. These include Christ Church, First Baptist of Crown Heights, the Blue Nile Rites of Passage, Congress of the United States of America, Hakeem Jeffries, amongst others. It is an honor to join you all in celebrating the extraordinary life of Reverend Dr. Calvin Otis Butts III. Reverend Butts knew that better than anyone how to get things done in New York. And he used this gift to do right by his community, fighting for fair housing, education, health care, and racial justice. Fueled by the powerful combination of faith and pragmatism, he let no issue fall by the wayside. His life is a lesson to us all in how to stand up for what's right. The pain of this loss is sharp, so we may all take some comfort in knowing that his spirit lives on here at the Abyssinian Church, across Harlem, and throughout our nation. Michelle and I extend our heartfelt condolences to Patricia and all whose lives were touched by this remarkable man, Barack Hussein Obama. We have received a resolution from Sisters Chapel of Spelman College. It reads, whereas Dr. Butts faithfully served the soul of Spelman College when he brought forth a word of God at the 2016 Interfaith Service marking the inauguration of Dr. Mary Smith Campbell, the 10th president of Spelman College, and served as the 2018 baccalaureate preacher. In his opening lines of the baccalaureate sermon, Dr. Butts shared the mantra of his ministry, whereas Dr. Butts serves as an eternal model for a powerful life that is lived to surrender to the call of God. Dr. Butts also served as the president of the State University of New York, the College of Old Westbury, living further into his intersection vocation of faith and education. This comes from Spelman College Sisters Chapel. We have several distinguished guests, sisters and brothers, who are present with us today. We are grateful for the presence of U.S. Congressman Adriano Espaillat. The Honorable Letitia James, the Attorney General for the state of New York. Our Manhattan DA and a longtime life member of the Abyssinian Church, Alvin Bragg. Mona Rankin, who was the Chief of Staff at SUNY Old Westbury for many years, for Dr. Calvin Butts. H. Carl McCall, the former Comptroller for the state of New York. Congressman Rangel. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson from Georgetown University, public intellectual. Dr. Clifford A. Jones, the pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Dr. Michael Lomax of the United Negro College Fund. President Lakeisha Warren, the president of New York Theological Seminary. Father Joseph McShane, the president emeritus of Fordham University, who also extended to Dr. Butts an invitation to serve as the 2022 commencement speaker, bestowing upon him the honorary doctorate of divinity on May the 21st, 2022. And Dr. Gerald Cataro, the executive director of the Center for Catholic School Leadership and Faith-Based Education in the Graduate School of Education. This is the doctoral program where Dr. Butts served as distinguished professor, and it is in that same program that yours truly completed a dissertation entitled Ordained Presidency: Education, Faith, and Social Activism, the Leadership of Calvin Otis Butts III. All the ministers have been recognized. We thank you again for joining us throughout the country. God bless and keep you.
At this time, we have a musical tribute by multi-award-winning singer and composer, producer, and performer Valerie Simpson is going to come.
Patricia Butts and family, Abyssinian family. You know, when I got the news, it kind of knocked me down. I called my friend, Damian Sneed, your musical director. I couldn't believe it. And then I called B. Michael and Mark, and I said, what is going on in our world? What's going on here? And then I got a message a couple days ago to be on the program, and I thought about all the times before when he resided over such an occasion as this. And I might have got up and sang. You were there. I sang for Cicely Tyson, Andre Leon Talley. He was even here for my husband, Nick Ashford. So I figured I couldn't do none of those old songs. And yesterday, in a prayerful mood, we all mourn in our own way. We all cry at different things, different times of the day. We all mourn, grieve in our own way. We all feel hurt. I believe that's okay. We all break down in our own way. The run of things, we realize we've run out of things, no time to say. Tears fall down in their own way, own way. We all mourn in our own way. Patricia Butts, you faced the storm in your own way. Oh, we held you strong, hands at your back all the way. Reverend Butts, he was right. He showed us the way. He left us with the keys. The church's power won't go away. We all mourn in our own way. I just want to say this one thing. We all mourn in our own way. Through words, thought, song. I'm feeling it today. Feeling it today. We grieve in our own way. Hey. Through sunshine, through rain, through sorrow, through pain, we mourn in our own way. Hey, in our own way.
Thank you so much. This time we have just two more reflections by Pastor Dr. William Epps, who's the senior pastor of Second Baptist Church of Los Angeles, also a son of Abyssinian. And then Deacon Gerald Barber is going to come. Barber is going to come. He is the chair of our diaconate.
Presiding officer Griffin, to the eulogist Marvin McMickle, to officers, members, and friends of the Abyssinian Baptist Church, elected officials, friends visiting from around the country to celebrate the life of Calvin Otis Butts III. I was hired to work here at Abyssinian in 1968 by Adam Clayton Powell, Jr. I served with him for 4 years, a year and a half on his congressional staff. And then when Dr. Proctor was called to be the pastor, he decided to keep me, which for that I was very grateful. And then we decided on staffing, and he decided that we needed to have students from Union Theological School come and share with the Abyssinian Church to split up the responsibility that was required of ministers. I couldn't do any more than what I was doing. I was the minister for nuptials and obsequies, funerals and weddings, junior church, youth ministries, Christian education. Here all day on Sundays because you have 52 auxiliaries at that time, and they all had a Sunday in order to raise some money to make the church's budget. So my schedule was just wrecked. I had no social life that they knew about anyway. So it was an honor when Dean Jones at Union Theological School recommended Marvin McMickle and Calvin Butts, and they came on board. And the lady was telling me she remembers when the three of us were here, they considered us the awesome threesome. Because it really didn't matter which one of us was going to preach. You were going to get a good word. And so I'm here because of my relationship with Calvin Otis Butts III. We text each other often. He has invited me here to preach at Abyssinian on every special occasion that you've had during his tenure here. For that, he was honoring me. I did your bicentennial, your auxiliary day, Powell and Memorial Day, Powell and Proctor Memorial Day. And so I appreciate him very much for all of that. We would see each other at conventions. I knew something was wrong when he sent me a text. He sent me a text in April. And he said, I love you. You're a brother beloved. You've always been a stand-up guy. He said, I remember when my wife and I, with our 9-month-old son, must have been Calvin O. Butts IV. He said, you know, we were walking down to Abyssinian from Union, and you came by in your car, and you picked us up and took us to church. And you've been a stand-up brother ever since. So I called to try to find out. I said, well, how you doing? Because that struck me. I figured something was going on. He took I think another month or two before he called me back. I was leaving messages, text messages. They were going through, but the voicemail was full. And so he finally called me back to let me know that he was in a bad way, that he was real sick. I said, well, I can come see you. He said, well, I'm not seeing anybody. I said, okay. But, you know, I can come to New York. I crisscross the country like most folk go around the block. He says, no, when you get to New York, call me. But he passed on Friday, and I didn't get to New York until Sunday. So I missed him. So I'm here representing the Ministers and Missionaries Benefit Board, of which he was a participant. And they authorized me to say that a contribution will be sent to Abyssinian, earmarked for Abbey West in lieu of flowers, because that's what the family would like. So look forward to getting that contribution. And give me just another minute and indulge me, if you please. Okay, I know time is short, but I'll be very, very quick. You know, Pericles, that Athens general and politician and orator, said that what we leave behind when we exit this ephemeral reality and move to that bourne from whose shore no traveler returns is not etched in monuments of stone, but it's what is woven into the lives of others. This family, he is woven into their lives as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, as a friend. This congregation where he's pastored, he is woven into your life. How you demonstrate and receive a faith that will not shrink though pressed by every foe, of faith, and with a trust in an unfaltering God who always responds in the most loving and perfect way toward all of the creatures made as objects of his love and affection. And so to the Harlem community in New York City, he is woven into their hearts, woven into their lives, a sense of social justice and equality for everybody. And so live on what he is woven into your life. live more fully as a result of the inspiration you derive from what he has woven into your life. Death is potent, but not omnipotent. There are some things that death can't do. Death can't cancel a contribution that a person makes in a lifetime, to limit the length of the legacy that a loved one leaves behind. Death cannot erase the experiences you hold dear, no more the memories you hold dear to you. Death and life had a showdown on a skull-shaped hill called Calvary. They took an innocent man on trumped-up charges, and they hung him high and stretched him wide, and out there he died. They thought it was over, but early on Sunday, a few women threaded their way through the darkened streets of a sleeping city. And when they got to the place where Jesus was buried, they found out he's not here. Why you seek the living among the dead? He's risen, as he said. In Christ, God changed death from a period to a comma, the grave from a terminal point to a thoroughfare that leads somewhere. So when we lay down for death's long sleep, we move beyond the boundaries of time and space, down the corridors of infinity, to be with God in eternity forever and forever. Yes, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord, for they rest from their labors and their works do follow them.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like deepest soul, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when my face shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back like a scroll, the trump shall resound and the Lord shall descend. Even so it is well with my soul. And on this day, when we celebrate a man who I truly loved, it is truly well. God is in this place. Let me share two things with you, and I'll be very brief. A pastor, great preacher, great orator, but many of you we never talk about. Dr. Butts was a great administrator. And why do I say he was a great administrator? Because Dr. Butts was a great listener. And let me be very brief. The officers can attest to that. Every year, first Sunday in February, the officers, we would always meet because that was our annual church meeting. And Dr. Butts would always convene a meeting of the joint boards. And in this meeting, we would discuss issues of the day, the state of the church. And some of these meetings, sometimes you can imagine some of the issues, it could be quite intense, but always with love. Dr. Butts was always encouraging to hear from his officers, because before he went before that church board, we were one. Dr. Butts was one who believed we should always be in one accord, in agreement, in harmony. The magnitude of this church depends upon a man with a character like Dr. Butts. We're going through the process now of we never replace, because never ever use the word replace, because we're all originals. We're going to find someone who's going to take over after Dr. Butts leaves. And his leadership for this church, for the 33 years he served as our leader, was a man of great belief and trust. And we trusted in Dr. Butts, and he always showed respect for his officers, always. Dr. Butts was a humble man, but he was a man of deep faith. And whenever the officers would meet with Dr. Butts, he always showed respect for us. He encouraged us. You can imagine a church of this magnitude, what it requires. And it requires a man of deep abiding faith. The things you have heard today are only a symbol of what Dr. Butts was. Great preacher, great orator, great administrator. And often, when I talk to Dr. Butts in our private sessions, we often talk about the ancestors. He says, Deacon, never forget the ancestors. Because he always said the ancestors plowed the field, and we have truly reaped the harvest. So on this day, as we come to celebrate a man who I truly loved, and I say to this loving family, if there's anything we can do for you, Sister Butts family, always feel free to call upon us. will always be there for you. And always in my closing remarks, I say to those assembled, to God be the glory for the great things he has done, is doing, and will continue to do in our lives. And God bless our beloved pastor, Dr. Calvin Otis Butts III. Thank you.
Beloved, at this time, the obituary and Reverend Rashad Moore, who is the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and one of our sons, and then Joseph Joubert. Both of them are going to come at this time.
I must say that this service definitely reflects the life of our pastor. And if Reverend Butts was here right now, he would look over to the trustees. Long before I met Reverend Butts, my junior year at Morehouse, I heard his voice early Sunday mornings on 98.7 KISS FM, direct from the pulpit. Coming out of my father's bathroom. His cadence and his passion could make everything inside of you wake up, inspiring us all to walk taller, think higher, and to love more. Long before I met Reverend Butts in person, I witnessed his captivating presence in Bob Gore's photographic journal, This Far by Faith. What manner of man is this? How can I be just like him? Where did he go to school? Morehouse. What did he major in? Philosophy. Where did he go to seminary? Union. And I took Gore's book and used it as a roadmap for my life, and it led me right here to the Abyssinian Baptist Church. I followed that path, and I finally met the voice and the man in the pictures. And he became not a role model, but a mentor, a pastor, and a spiritual leader. We are gathered here today because, in our own ways, we touched the hem of his garment. We heard a sermon on the radio. He prayed for us by bedside. He came by the house. He stood up for us when we were in trouble. He counseled us when we were confused. He looked out for us when we were lost. He brought us home when we were out in the cold. One of the things I loved about Reverend Butts the most is that he was a disciplined preacher. Reverend Butts would make a good point, and you would think he was getting ready to slay the house, and he would go, shh. Listen, beloved. When the ministers processed in on Sunday morning and the congregation grew loud in greeting each other, Reverend Butts would look at the program and say, at the top of your program, you will read these words. To all those who enter here, be thoughtful, be silent, be reverent. Before the service, speak to God. During the service, let God speak to you. And after the service, speak to others. So in the spirit of Reverend Butts, who taught us how to listen, let us regard the obituary today in silence. Take this moment to go deep within and think about your own Reverend Butts story. Remember his voice, listen for that voice, and as we leave this place, let us become the voice. We will be blessed now by none other than one that he really loved, Brother Joseph Joubert.